Inside a glittering Manhattan restaurant Billionaire, Isabella Vaughn stood frozen as her ex-lover Julian Pierce laughed in front of every guest at the table. He raised his glass and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "You're too cold to ever be loved, Isabella. Nobody in this room will stand by you. Nobody." The crystal chandeliers hummed. Forks stopped moving. Every eye turned to her, waiting for the queen to break. Then a stranger stepped forward, placed one hand flat on the table and said in a calm, low voice, "She's my wife." The restaurant was called Lumiere, perched on the 42nd floor of a glass tower above Park Avenue. Every table was a private negotiation. Every glass of wine cost more than most people earned in a day. The waiters moved like ghosts in black, trained to hear nothing and remember less. Caleb Morgan had worked there for almost 2 years. He was 34, quiet, with the kind of face that disappeared in a crowd unless someone bothered to look twice. Before Lumiere, he had been an army medic. Before that, he had been a kid from a town in Pennsylvania nobody could find on a map. He didn't talk about either life. He poured wine, he cleared plates, he kept his head down. That was the deal he had made with himself the day he walked into this city with $200 in a duffel bag. That Thursday evening, he was assigned to the private dining room on the West Wing. 8 guests, 1 reservation under the name Vaughn. He read the briefing card twice and said nothing. Isabella Vaughn arrived at 7:45 exactly, which meant she was 15 minutes late by the standards of the city, and on time by her own. She wore black. She always wore black. At 31, she controlled a logistics empire her father had built alone, and the boardrooms of Manhattan had learned to speak her name carefully. She had a face the magazines called beautiful and the bankers called dangerous. She did not smile when she walked in. She rarely smiled at all. Caleb watched her from the side of the room as she greeted the table. He noticed the way she scanned the seats, counted the faces, calculated the angles. She was looking for someone, and when she found him, her shoulders went tight. Julian Pierce was already there. He had arrived early, seated himself at the head of the table without permission, and ordered a bottle of something expensive on her account. He was 36, polished with a smile that had charmed half the women in the room before they understood what kind of man he was. He had dated Isabella for 2 years. He had asked her to marry him once. She had said no. He had not forgiven her for that, and he had spent the month since making sure everyone in their circle knew he was the one who had walked away. The dinner was supposed to be a soft introduction between 2 firms negotiating a merger. 6 investors, 2 principals. Polite conversation, polite numbers. Isabella sat down, ordered sparkling water, and tried to steer the table toward business. Julian let her speak for about 9 minutes before he interrupted. "You know what I admire about Isabella," he said, leaning back in his chair, swirling his wine. The other guests went still. "She's the only woman I've ever met who can read a balance sheet and feel absolutely nothing. Not joy, not fear, nothing." He raised his glass to her. "Cheers to the Ice Queen of West 46th Street." A few of the guests laughed politely, the kind of laugh that hopes the joke ends quickly. It did not. Julian was just getting started. He talked about the months they had spent together. He talked about how she had never once cried, never once raised her voice, never once acted like a woman who needed anything from anyone. He framed it as a compliment. Everyone at the table understood it was not. Isabella sat with her hands folded on the white linen, her face a careful mask, her water glass untouched. Caleb stood near the wall with a bottle in his hand and felt something cold gather in his chest. He had seen this kind of cruelty before, not in restaurants, in other places, in other countries, in men who smiled while they did damage. He kept his eyes on the carpet and told himself this was not his problem. Julian leaned forward and lowered his voice, just enough to make sure everyone heard. "Let's be honest, Isabella. The merger is going to fall through. You know why, because nobody trusts a woman who has nothing to lose. No husband, no partner. No one waiting for her at home. The board talks. The investors talk. They look at you, and they see a fortress. And nobody invests in a fortress. His mouth widened. You're too cold to ever be loved, and nobody in this room is going to stand by you. Not tonight. Not ever. The silence that followed was the worst kind. It was not shock. It was agreement. The investors looked at their plates. One of them adjusted his tie. Another reached for his phone, as if a notification had just saved him from having to take a side. Isabella did not move. She did not blink. But Caleb, watching from the wall, saw her hand tighten around the linen napkin until her knuckles went white. He understood in that moment what was happening. This was not just an insult. This was a public execution. Julian was killing the merger, killing her credibility, killing 2 years of work in front of the only people whose opinion mattered. And he was doing it because she had said no to him once in a quiet room a long time ago. Caleb should have walked away. He had been trained for years not to interfere in things that did not concern him. He had a job. He had a quiet life. He had no business inside a war between 2 people he did not know. He told himself all of this in the space of about 3 seconds. Then he set the bottle down on the side station, walked across the carpet, and stopped beside her chair. He placed one hand flat on the white tablecloth. He looked directly at Julian. His voice was low, and even the voice of a man who had said harder things in worse rooms. "She's my wife." 2 words, and one possessive. Nothing more. The table did not move. Julian's expression twitched at the corners, the way a smile does when it is trying to decide whether to stay or flee. The investor closest to Isabella set his fork down very slowly, as if afraid it might make a sound. Isabella turned her head and looked at Caleb for the first time. He had never spoken to her before. She had never noticed him. He could see in her eyes the exact second she understood the offer and the cost of it. He watched her decide. She slid her left hand across the table and rested it lightly on top of his. She did not look at Julian. She looked at the investor across from her and said in a voice as steady as concrete, "Caleb prefers to keep our marriage private. He doesn't enjoy these dinners. I asked him to come tonight as a favor." The investor nodded slowly. The other guests adjusted in their chairs, recalibrating, rebuilding the room around this new piece of information. Julian's expression fell away entirely. He stared at Caleb the way a man stares at a stranger who has just walked into his house and turned off the lights. "Your husband," Julian said. The word came out flat. "My husband," Isabella said. Caleb did not sit. He did not speak again. He simply stood there with her hand on his and let the lie become real in the quiet between heartbeats. The waiter in him was gone. He did not know what had replaced him. The dinner resumed somehow. Conversations restarted in low, careful tones. The merger was not mentioned again that night. Julian drank quickly and said little. He left before dessert, kissing no one, looking back once from the doorway, with an expression Caleb would remember for a long time afterward. When the last of the guests had gone and the room was empty, except for the 2 of them, Isabella stood up. She straightened the cuffs of her jacket. She did not thank him. She did not apologize. She looked at him for a long moment, with eyes that gave away nothing. "Tomorrow," she said. 9 in the morning. My office. The address is on this card." She slid a small white card across the table and walked out without waiting for an answer. Caleb stood alone in the empty private dining room, the card in his hand, the white linen still creased where her fingers had been. He had told a lie that took less than 3 seconds to say. He already knew it was going to cost him everything. By 8:45 the next morning, Caleb was standing on the sidewalk outside a tower on 5th Avenue, holding the white card in his hand and trying to talk himself into walking away. He had not slept. He had spent the night sitting on the edge of his bed in a 1-room apartment in Queens, replaying 2 words on a loop. He had decided sometime around 4 in the morning that he would go to the meeting only to end the lie cleanly. He would tell her He could not do this. He would walk out. He would go back to Lumiere and pour wine and forget her face. He rode the elevator to the 38th floor. The receptionist already knew his name. That was the first thing that bothered him. The second was the way the assistants stopped talking when he walked past their desks, the way they looked at him with a quiet, careful curiosity, as if a rumor had run ahead of him through the building overnight. Isabella was waiting for him in a glass office that overlooked half the city. She did not stand up when he entered. She gestured to the chair across from her desk and waited until the door closed before she spoke. "You came," she said. "I came to tell you I'm out," Caleb said. He stayed standing. "Whatever happened last night, I'm sorry I made it more complicated. I'll sign whatever you need me to sign. I won't talk to anyone. I just want to go back to my life." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened a folder on her desk, turned it around, and slid it toward him. "That's not possible anymore," she said. "Read it." He looked down. It was a printout of an industry news site. The headline had been published at 6 in the morning. Isabella Vaughn's quiet marriage, confirmed by sources at private dinner. There was a grainy photo someone had taken on a phone. He could see the back of his own head. He could see her hand on his. "By noon," she said, "every firm we do business with will have read this. By tonight, the merger team will be asking my legal counsel for a copy of the marriage certificate. By tomorrow, my board will want to meet you." Caleb closed the folder slowly. "Then tell them the truth," he said. "Tell them it was a mistake." "If I tell them the truth," she said, "I lose the merger. I lose $600 million in committed capital. I lose the trust of every investor who was in that room last night. And Julian Pierce, who has been waiting 18 months for an opening, takes the company." She stood up then and walked to the window. She did not look at him when she spoke again. Her voice was lower, almost conversational, almost tired. "My father built this company over 40 years. He left it to me 3 years ago, the week before he died. The board has never wanted me in this chair. They tolerate me because the numbers are good. The moment they smell weakness, they will replace me, and Julian will be the first name on their list. He has been planning this for a long time. Last night was a test. He wanted to see if anyone would defend me." She turned and looked at him. "You did. I don't know why, but you did. And now I am asking you to keep doing it, for 90 days, until the merger closes." "90 days, Caleb said. "90 days, she said. "After that, we separate quietly. There is no contract you sign tonight that ties you to me beyond that. You walk away with enough money to never pour wine again." He should have said no. He had rehearsed the no all night. But he stood there in the glass office, and he thought about Julian's face at the table, and the way the investors had looked at their plates, and the way her knuckles had gone white around the napkin. He thought about the $200 he had walked into the city with. He thought about a quiet life that suddenly did not feel as quiet as he had pretended. 90 days, he said. She nodded once. She did not smile. He understood even then that she was not capable of relief in the way other people were. Whatever she felt, she filed it away. The first rule she told him was that they would never explain. Explanations invited follow-up questions. They would simply behave like two people who had been married for some time and did not feel the need to perform it. The second rule was that he would move into her apartment that week. Not because they had to share a bedroom, but because the staff and the doormen and the cleaning crew all talked, and a husband who did not live with his wife was a husband who did not exist. The third rule was that he would learn the names of 42 people by the end of the month, and she would teach him which ones to smile at and which ones to avoid. He moved in on Sunday. The apartment was on the 73rd floor of a building on Central Park West, and it was the quietest place he had ever been in his life. There were 2 bedrooms separated by a hallway, long enough that he sometimes did not see her for an entire evening. She worked late. He did too in the beginning because she had hired him onto the company payroll as a senior consultant in the strategy office, a title that meant nothing and required him to sit through meetings he did not understand and nod at the right intervals. The first public test came at a charity gala the following Saturday. 300 guests. Cameras at the door. Isabella wore a dress the color of dark wine and put her arm through his at the entrance, with the smoothness of someone who had practiced. He had bought a suit that morning. It cost more than his rent. She had told him to keep the receipt. Inside, people came up to them in steady waves, and Caleb learned quickly that the trick was to say very little and let her speak. He watched her work the room. He watched the way she made every person feel briefly important, and then released them before they could ask anything difficult. He watched with a strange tightness in his chest how lonely the work looked from up close. Julian was there. He had not been on the guest list, but men like Julian did not need to be on lists. He found them halfway through the second hour near a table of untouched champagne flutes. "You haven't returned my calls, Isabella," Julian said. "I haven't received any I wanted to return," she said. He turned his attention to Caleb. He looked him up and down with the careful, smiling attention of a man cataloging weaknesses. "Caleb Morgan," Julian said. "I had my people pull your file. Army medic, honorable discharge in 2017. 2 years at Lumiere. No marriage on record in any state I checked. No engagement announcement. No wedding photos. No wedding registry. Nothing. You are on paper a very interesting kind of husband." "I'm a private person," Caleb said. "You're a ghost," Julian said. "And ghosts don't hold up under pressure." His mouth curved. It was the same expression from the restaurant. "You should have picked someone with a longer paper trail, sweetheart," he said. "I'm going to enjoy this." He walked away. Isabella's hand on Caleb's arm did not tighten. Her face did not change. But on the drive home, she stared out the window of the car and did not speak for the entire 40-block ride. The pressure increased after that. Julian began feeding stories to the financial press, anonymous sources questioning the timing of the marriage, a blog post hinting at fraud, a photographer outside the building. Caleb was pulled into a board meeting on a Tuesday morning where 11 men in dark suits asked him questions for an hour. Where had he met Isabella? When had they decided to marry? Why had there been no announcement? He answered with the script she had given him, and he watched her sit at the head of the table with her hands folded, and he understood for the first time the full shape of what she was holding alone. That night, back in the apartment, she came into the kitchen at almost midnight while he was making coffee. She had taken off her shoes. Her hair was down for the first time he could remember. She looked for one unguarded second like a person and not a position. "You did well today," she said. "They didn't believe me," he said. "They didn't have to," she said. "They just had to not be able to prove it." She poured herself a glass of water. She did not leave the kitchen. She stood across from him at the counter, and the silence between them stretched into something different than it had been before. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "That night? At the restaurant?" He thought about the question for a long time before he answered. "Because nobody was going to," he said. "And I knew what that felt like." She looked at him. She did not ask him what he meant. She drank her water. She set the glass in the sink. On her way out of the kitchen, she stopped at the doorway and said without turning around, "Thank you, Caleb." It was the first time she had ever said his first name like it belonged to her. 3 weeks before the merger was scheduled to close, the board called an emergency session. A leak had reached the regulators. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint suggesting that Isabella Vaughn had committed material misrepresentation by claiming a marital status she could not document. The complaint had no teeth on its own, but the timing was poison. The merger required regulatory clearance. Regulatory clearance required clean optics. The session was held in the largest boardroom in the building, 23 people around the table, outside counsel on speakerphone. Caleb was asked to attend. He sat to her right. He had stopped pretending somewhere in the last month that he was only there to perform a role. When the chairman, a gray-haired man named Richard Halsey, asked her directly whether her marriage was real, the room went still. She did not look at Caleb. She looked at the chairman. "My husband and I were married privately because I do not believe my personal life belongs to this company," she said. "I will not produce a certificate to satisfy a rumor planted by a man with a grudge. If the board doesn't trust me, the board can vote me out. If the board does, then this conversation is over." It was a bluff. They both knew it. Caleb felt the lie tighten around them like a wire pulled hard at both ends. The chairman looked at him. "Mr. Morgan," Halsey said, "do you have anything you want to add?" Caleb thought about saying nothing. He thought about telling the truth. He thought for one quick and terrible second about standing up and walking out of the room and out of her life and out of the lie before it consumed both of them. He did not do any of those things. He looked at the chairman. He looked at the 11 men who had questioned him in this same room weeks earlier. He looked at Isabella's profile and the calm she was wearing like armor, and he understood that the quiet life he had told himself he was protecting was already gone. It had been gone since the moment he had set the bottle down at Lumiere. "I stand by my wife," Caleb said. "I'm not going to defend her against a rumor. I'm going to ask the board to do its job, or get out of her way." The room did not move. The chairman closed his folder slowly. He looked at Isabella. He looked at Caleb. He nodded once. "Motion to table," he said. The merger stayed alive. The session ended. The board filed out one by one, and outside the window, the city kept moving as if nothing had happened. When the room was empty, Isabella did not stand up. She sat in her chair with her hands folded and looked at the polished surface of the table for a long time. Caleb stayed where he was. He did not know what he had just done. Then his phone buzzed. It was a number he did not recognize. He answered it because he could not think of a reason not to. "Caleb." Julian's voice said calm and almost friendly. "I have something you should see. Check your email. I think you and I should have a conversation about your future. And hers." The line went dead. Caleb opened his email. There was a photo attached. It was old. It was him 10 years younger in a uniform at a place he had not let himself think about in a very long time. There was a second attachment underneath. It was a draft article. It had his full name in the headline. It had a photograph of Isabella beside it. Across the boardroom, she lifted her head and saw his face. And for the first time since he had met her, he watched Isabella Vaughn understand that she was about to lose. Caleb did not show her the email in the boardroom. He waited until they were back at the apartment, until the door had closed and the city had gone quiet 73 floors below them. Then he set the phone on the kitchen counter and turned the screen toward her. She read the draft article in silence, the photograph of him in uniform, the redacted incident report Julian had somehow obtained, the names of 2 men Caleb had not allowed himself to say out loud in 9 years. The article framed it as a scandal, a cover-up, a husband with a hidden past, attached to a billionaire who had married him in secret. The truth of what had happened in that desert was not in the article. The truth never was. "He doesn't have proof of anything," Isabella said finally. "It's innuendo." "It doesn't have to be proof," Caleb said. "It only has to run." She set the phone down. She walked to the window. He watched her shoulders, the way they stayed perfectly square, the way she refused to let the weight of the moment bend her even an inch. "He's offering a meeting," Caleb said. "He wants to talk. He wants you to walk away," she said. "He wants you to disappear and leave me holding the lie alone. The article is the price of staying." She turned around. Her face was the face from the restaurant, from the boardroom, from every public moment he had watched her hold herself together. But her eyes, for the first time, were not. "You should go," she said. "Tonight. Tomorrow at the latest. Take the money in the contract. He won't run the article if you're already gone. The story dies without you." "And the merger," Caleb said. The merger dies too, she said. But I die smaller. Without you in the headline, this is just another bad quarter. With you, it's a federal investigation that takes 2 years to close. I can survive the first. I cannot survive the second. She looked at him. Go, Caleb. I gave you 90 days. I'm giving you back the rest. He stood in the kitchen and looked at her. This woman he had known for 69 days, and he understood that she was doing the thing she had done her entire life. She was absorbing the cost. She was paying alone. She was sending him away because she had decided somewhere between the boardroom and the elevator that protecting him was worth more to her than winning. It was the first time he had ever seen her choose a person over a position. No, he said. She blinked. Nope, he said again. I'm not leaving. He came at me because he thinks I'm the weak point. I'm not. I'm the one who walked across that carpet. I'm the one who said the words. I'm staying, and we're going to finish this together. She did not argue with him. She did not thank him either. She walked past him into the living room and picked up her phone and made 3 calls in a row, her voice clipped and exact the way it was when she was working. By the time the sun came up, she had a plan. The plan did not involve breaking the law. Isabella was many things, but she was not careless. What it involved was a former senior associate at Julian's old firm, a woman named Dana Whitmore, who had quietly resigned 8 months earlier after refusing to assist in a different smear campaign. Isabella had kept the door open. Now she walked through it. Dana came to the apartment at 6 in the morning with a leather portfolio under her arm. She was prepared to sign a sworn affidavit about Julian's pattern of pulling confidential records, and she had brought a former colleague with her, a man named Marcus Riley, who was prepared to say the same. Both of them had documentation. Both of them had been waiting. Isabella had not been the only person Julian had treated as disposable. The meeting with Julian was set for 11 that morning, at a hotel bar in Midtown, that he liked because the lighting was good for photographs. Isabella did not go. Caleb went alone. That was part of the plan. Julian was already at the table when he arrived with 2 glasses of water and a folder placed precisely between them. His mouth curved into the same expression Caleb had now seen too many times to count. I was hoping you'd come alone, Julian said. It tells me she's already given up. It tells you what I wanted it to tell you, Caleb said. Julian opened the folder. He laid out the article draft, the photograph, a list of media contacts, a timeline of release. He spoke calmly, as if he were walking a junior associate through a deal. His offer was simple. Caleb would sign a statement admitting the marriage was a fraud. Caleb would name Isabella as the architect. In exchange, Julian would bury the article. The merger would still die, but Isabella would survive personally. She might even keep her seat on the board eventually, in some reduced form. You think you're saving her, Julian said. I'm offering you the only version of saving her that actually works. Caleb listened to every word. He let the man finish. Then he reached into his jacket and set his own folder on the table. Inside it were 3 documents. The first was a sworn affidavit from Dana Whitmore, attesting that she had been instructed by Julian to pull confidential personnel files on Caleb in violation of federal law. The second was a corroborating affidavit from Marcus Riley, with attached internal records preserved when he left the firm. The third was a notarized timeline showing that 2 named journalists had been promised the article regardless of whether Caleb cooperated, which made Julian's offer today a documented act of extortion under New York state statute. My wife's counsel has spent the morning verifying these, Caleb said. Dana and Marcus have been waiting a long time to put their names on something. You gave them a reason. Julian looked at the documents. He did not pick them up. His face did the thing it had done in the restaurant, the small twitch at the corner, the moment of recalculation. You're bluffing, he said. You can find out at noon, Caleb said. That's when our counsel files a complaint with the state attorney's office, along with a request for an injunction against publication. Unless you withdraw the article, and you call off your sources, and you sign a non-disparagement agreement that we will have to your office by 2. Julian sat very still. You don't have the standing to do this to me, he said. I'm her husband, Caleb said. I have exactly the standing she gives me. He stood up. He left the folder on the table. He walked out of the bar, and he did not look back. And the next morning the article never ran. Julian signed the agreement at 1:47 in the afternoon. He stepped down from his own firm's advisory board within the week. He did not appear at any industry event for the rest of the year. He did not contact Isabella again. The merger closed 2 weeks later, at a number slightly higher than projected. The night the deal closed, Isabella came home at almost midnight. Caleb was in the kitchen again. It had become the place they spoke somehow, the only room in the apartment that was small enough for the truth. She set her bag on the counter. She did not take off her coat. The contract ends in 9 days, she said. I know, Caleb said. She looked at him. The armor was on, but it was thinner than it had been. He had learned over 81 days to read the difference. I want to ask you something, she said. I am not asking it as your employer. I am not asking it as the person who pulled you into this. I am asking it as Isabella. He waited. I would like the marriage to be real, she said. Not for the company, not for the board, not for anyone in any room we have ever been in together. For me. Her voice did not shake. It almost did once on the word me, and she steadied it. I have spent my whole life being the person nobody stood next to. You stood next to me before you knew my name. I am not going to spend the rest of my life pretending that didn't matter. Caleb looked at her across the counter. He thought about a sidewalk on 5th Avenue and a card in his hand, and a quiet life he had been so sure he wanted to protect. He thought about how the word husband had stopped feeling like a costume sometime around the 4th week, and how he had not let himself notice. I haven't been pretending for a while, he said. I know, she said. Then yes, he said. She did not move toward him. She did not need to. Some part of the distance between them had already been crossed weeks ago in rooms full of people who had not understood what they were watching. They were married for real in a small office downtown on a Wednesday afternoon. There was no announcement. There were no photographers. The witnesses were 2 assistants from the strategy office and a notary who did not recognize either of them. She wore black. He wore the same suit he had bought the morning of the gala. The certificate was filed before the close of business. The story of how it had begun never fully left the rooms it had been told in. The investors who had been at Lumiere that night kept the version they had been given. The board kept theirs. Julian Pierce, in the years that followed, told a different one to anyone who would still listen, and fewer people did. What Caleb understood by the end was that the lie had not built anything. The lie had only bought time. Everything that had become real between them, the trust, the partnership, the quiet kitchens at midnight, had been built in the space the lie had held open. The lie had been a door. They had walked through it together. What they found on the other side was the thing that lasted. A truth can begin from a lie, but it is trust that makes it real. In a world built on power and judgment, a person is not defined by the position they hold, but by who they choose to stand beside when nobody is forcing them to. Caleb had set down a bottle in a private dining room on the 42nd floor of a building on Park Avenue. He had said 2 words. He had not understood then that he was choosing. He understood now.